Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadi alladhina istafa. Amma ba'd. قال تعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فهزموهم بإذن الله وقتل داود جالوت وآتاه الله الملك والحكمة وعلمه مما يشاء ولولا دفع الله الناس بعدهم ببعض لفسدت الأرض ولكن الله ذو فضل على العالمين. صدق الله العظيم. Dear respected brothers and elders and sisters that are listening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yesterday we talked about the Bani Israel and the traits and the behavior of Bani Israel. And we learned that they were very mischievous people, a very mischievous tribe. They would test their prophets. They would disobey the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They would transgress. And this caused Musa alayhi salam to be upset with his community and his people, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala favored Bani Israel with so many favors. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala freed them from the tyranny of Fir'aun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them man and salwa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed prophets in their community, in their tribes, but still the people remained ungrateful. So when Musa alayhi salam did pass away, after that the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was Yusha ibn Nun alayhi salam. He's not mentioned in the Holy Quran, but Hazrat Yusha alayhi salam, he led the Bani Israel to victory over the giant rulers of Jerusalem, and they recaptured the Holy Land. And when they recaptured the Holy Land, then there was peace and people were worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But after the death of Prophet Yusha alayhi salam, the Bani Israel went back into their bad ways, and they started killing the prophets, and they started harming prophets, and they started disobeying the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because of this, they used to lose battles, and when they would lose battles, they lost the battle, they lost Jerusalem, the Holy Land, to the Amalek. And when they lost this battle, they lost the chest that contained the souvenirs of Hazrat Musa alayhi salam and Hazrat Harun alayhi salam. This chest, this ark that contained the souvenirs of the household of Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, they would always take with them in battle, and because the barakat of this, the blessing of this, they would win the battles. But they lost this chest as well. So afterwards, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Prophet Samuel alayhi salam. And Prophet Samuel, he appointed Talut as the king of the Bani Israel. Some people weren't happy with that. Why an ordinary person is being given such a high rank? And some people were jealous. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this was His command, His order. So when Talut became the king, one of the symbols of his becoming the king was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will return the chest that contained the souvenirs of Hazrat Musa alayhi salam and Hazrat Harun alayhi salam back to the Bani Israel. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the use of angels, they carried this chest back to Talut and back to the Bani Israel. So that people acknowledge the Bani Israel, they acknowledge Talut as their king. Now, what happened was, they wanted to recapture Jerusalem. And Jerusalem at that time was in the hands of the Philistines. These were giants. These were big people, hardened people. And the Bani Israel, they were scared of them and scared of fighting them. But Talut, he led an army. And what happened was, when they came to battle, Jalut, he came out, or Goliath. So, we always hear the story of David versus Goliath, a small man versus a big giant. Sometimes we use this in sporting terms, when a small football team knocks out a big football team, and we say it's the David versus Goliath. So here, the David and Goliath is Dawud alayhi salam and Jalut. So today we're going to talk about Dawud alayhi salam. So when Jalut came out to fight, he was looking from the Bani Israel, who's going to fight me? So Dawud alayhi salam, he said to Talut that, give me the permission to fight Jalut. And Talut, he was reluctant. He goes, you're too young. Somebody strong, somebody who's experienced should fight Jalut, not you. But Dawud alayhi salam insisted. He said, I will fight him. I will take him on. And by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will be victorious. So Talut saw that he was eager. Dawud alayhi salam had no sword, no spear, nothing. All he had was a slingshot as a weapon. And he came onto the battlefield. And Jalut started laughing. Is this young boy going to take me on? Could you not choose anybody bigger? I will end up destroying this person. But what Jalut failed to recognize, that victory comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Dawud alayhi salam, what did he do? He loaded his slingshot with a stone, and he pulled the sling back, and he fired it, and he hit the forehead of Jalut, and Jalut fell to the ground dead. One slingshot, one small stone destroyed and killed Jalut. Dawud alayhi salam became an instant hero, that he killed the giant. This small person with no armor, no weapons, nothing, just a slingshot with one stone against this giant. And with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah ta'ala did it, that one stone was enough to kill Jalut. And after this, the people, they got worried. And that's when Bani Israel became victorious. Then the Bani Israel ruled over Jerusalem again. After Talut passed away, Prophet Dawud alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed him with kingdom. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed him with prophethood. Dawud alayhi salam, these were favors from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon Dawud alayhi salam. Dawud alayhi salam was a very pious servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He dedicated his worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is known that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Dawud alayhi salam such a beautiful voice, that when he would praise Allah, or when he would recite the Zabur, that even the mountains and the birds will hymn along with Dawud alayhi salam. They would also sing the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can just imagine when Dawud alayhi salam is reciting the Zabur, and when he's reciting the Zabur, how sweet, how melodious the sound must have been, that even the mountains and the birds and the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would start humming the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dawud alayhi salam was known for his piety. He used to fast one day, and he would not fast the other day. So every second day he would fast. Abdullah ibn Umar radiyallahu anh narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said the most beloved fasting to Allah was the fasting of Prophet Dawud alayhi salam. He used to fast on alternate days. Every second day he would fast. And the most beloved prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the prayer of Dawud alayhi salam. He used to sleep the first half of the night and pray for 1/3 of it, and again sleep for 1/6 of it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave so many blessings and favors to Dawud alayhi salam. Dawud alayhi salam, he was a craftsman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would make iron melt in his hand and he would shape it to however he likes. And because of this, he would create armor for his army. So when they would go into battle, they would be prepared. And because of this, he would earn his money. He wouldn't rely on people. He would, with his own hands, earn money. His day, he would split into 4 parts. The first part, he would earn his living. The second part, he would praise his Lord. The third part, he would listen to the complaints of the people and hear what the people had to say. And the fourth part, he would deliver sermons and khutbahs. He would educate the people. And because of this, there are many stories about Dawud alayhi salam. One day, Dawud alayhi salam, he was praying on his mat and he ordered the guard that don't let anybody come into the house and interrupt me. But 2 men managed to enter and disturb Dawud alayhi salam. So Dawud alayhi salam asked him, "Who are you?" And one of them said, "Don't be frightened. We have a dispute and we want you to resolve it." So he asked, "What is it?" He said, "This is my brother. He has 99 sheep and I have 1. He gave it to me, but now he's taking it back." So Hazrat Dawud, without hearing from the second party, he decided he did you wrong by taking the sheep back. So he must return the sheep. When the 2 men vanished, Dawud realized these 2 were angels sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to teach him a lesson that whenever you hear a dispute, always listen to both sides of the story. Don't just listen to one side of the story, always listen to both sides of the story, then pass judgment. So these were lessons that were taught to Dawud alayhi salam because he would educate people, he was there to help people, he was there to sort people's problems out. On another occasion, Hazrat Dawud alayhi salam, he had a son called Sulaiman alayhi salam, which we will talk about tomorrow. And he was only about 11 years old at the time. And what happened was one day, Dawud alayhi salam, he was sitting in his usual place. He was resolving people's issues and problems. And a person came who owned a field. And he said, "Oh Dawud alayhi salam, oh Prophet of Allah, this man's sheep came to my field at night and ate up the grapes and everything destroyed. And because of this, I want some compensation." So Dawud alayhi salam asked the owner of the sheep, "Is this true that your sheep destroyed all the grapes and all the fields?" And he said, "Yes, they did." So Dawud alayhi salam, he said, "What you need to do is give all your flock of sheep to this man, this person who lost everything in his field. This is the decision." Sulaiman alayhi salam was sat there and he said to his father, "If you don't mind, can I give an opinion?" So Dawud alayhi salam said, "Yes, go on." He said, "Won't it be better if the shepherd who owns the sheep, if he cultivates the field of the person that owns the field and restores everything back to normal, but in the meantime, the person who owns the field, he takes the sheep and he gets benefit from the wool and the milk. But once everything is repaired, then the person who owns the field, he returns the sheep back to the shepherd. That way, the shepherd will be happy that he has got his flock of sheep back, he can make his livelihood, and the person with the field will be happy because his field has been restored. Dawud alayhi salam was really happy with the wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted to Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam. And he said, "You are truly Sulaiman, the wise one." So Dawud alayhi salam, he was a noble prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He continued to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him honor, and with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he defeated the enemies and he gave honor and respect back to Bani Israel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the blessed land of Jerusalem once again. He ruled over Jerusalem for 40 years. Then just before the death, Dawud alayhi salam had the honor of rebuilding Masjid al-Aqsa. Remember, Masjid al-Aqsa is the second house to be built after the Kaaba during the time of Prophet Adam alayhi salam. Then we mentioned before, Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam with Ismail alayhi salam rebuilt the Kaaba, and then Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam with Ishaq alayhi salam rebuilt Masjid al-Aqsa. Now for the third time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave honor to Dawud alayhi salam to rebuild Masjid al-Aqsa, a place to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Dawud alayhi salam passed away before the work was completed. So when Dawud alayhi salam passed away, thousands of people attended his janazah, and it was so hot that day, the sun was so intense that Sulaiman alayhi salam, he called the birds to protect Dawud alayhi salam and the people from the sun. And this was a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to bestow prophethood and kingdom to Prophet Dawud alayhi salam's son, Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam. And inshallah tomorrow we will talk about Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam. May Allah ta'ala give us all the tawfiq to act upon what has been said. Wa akhiru dawana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.